Welcome to the Character Sheet, your home for all your fantasy and TTRPG news. And today we have two very special guests from the D&D team. We have Justice and Kara, who have worked on two of the new big box sets coming out of D&D. Welcome to the Hellfire Club, and of course the Heroes of the Borderlands starter set. But first of all, guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having
me.
Hello.
Great to be here.
And let's start with Heroes of the Borderlands, because it's the new starter set. As someone that grew up with, like, our DM was always like one of our friends' dads who and if not him, like his son who like inherited his dad's like first edition and second edition D&D stuff. And so I remember playing through the original Keeps of the Borderland, and like that being a like very kind of like one of the first early adventures I ever did. So what brought you guys back to this sort of this Borderlands setting for this brand new starter set in the 2024 edition?
Yeah, so for Heroes of the Borderlands, part of what gravitated us to that adventure, we had revisited a number of adventures last year with Quest from the Infinite Staircase.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the adventures that was kind of like on our list, but we wanted to give it the kind of proper setup, let it have all of the things that it needed to succeed and be an awesome starter product. And, it felt kind of perfect since that originally was part of the, I think the 1981 basic set. It felt appropriate to include that in a box set, not unlike that one.
Oh, amazing. And then having had some experience with it, like famously, there are especially a couple encounters in there that could just, you're level 1 characters and you walk into a room full of 30 kobolds and things can go south very quickly. So when you're making a starter set, how do you find that balance between making something that is fun and challenging and engaging, but also like maybe not repeat some of the issues that like, Keeps on the Borderland or the very early Temple of Elemental Evil had, where you walk into the wrong room and you're just dead?
Yeah, and I think there's something there, the philosophy of playing earlier D&D versus, kind of how the play has evolved over time. The other thing is like updating those adventures. Like you won't find 30 kobolds in any of the caves here. One, because that would require a lot more token sheets for you to have 30 different kobolds. And those are lettered, by the way. So that would be more than we have letters in our alphabet. They would have to be kobold A1, kobold A2 at that point. But, the game's balance has kind of evolved a little bit. We could, there are still some encounters that characters can wander into that are a bit above their level early on. But really it's arming DMs with tools that they have to shape the encounter to be a more manageable challenge, and also kind of giving them a heads up before they let the characters wander into some of those scenarios. For example, the big Caves of Chaos poster map, where at one point, players are basically going to get to look at that map, look at the different caves, and kind of choose where they want to go. But in the DM and their adventure booklet, they can actually see suggested levels for those. So if everybody's like, I really want to go to this cave, they might be able to foreshadow, some bones outside the cave, or say the owlbear's den, that maybe suggest it's not a good idea to go in there.
And then speaking of those components, like this is the most component-heavy starter set we've seen. And before I dive into some questions about that, like, when did you guys think that, for this edition, for 2024, for this new starter set, we're going to implement like a lot more tokens and like player boards and cards and player aids to help the characters along? And like kind of when was that decision made and kind of what was the thinking behind it?
Yeah, that had been that decision was made at the outset for this project. We wanted to do a more componentized approach. We wanted to encourage DMs and players to switch places, and also to provide them with kind of everything they need to tell these adventures. We got feedback over the course of this project with playtesting, but we also have feedback all the way going back to our previous starter sets in 5th edition. We know that people really liked the cards in the Essentials kit. They liked the maps. They wanted more of that. And so, rather than continuing with perforated cards, we kind of upgraded the cards. They liked the maps. We gave them more maps. We, added some quality of life improvements, like, the Essentials kit had card-based initiative. This one has a combat tracker, which is a lot like the notepad that DMs will use to track initiative in their games anyway. So that was a goal of ours from the very beginning. You know, our products at D&D last from pitch to print can vary from as short as 12 months historically to anywhere from 33 to more months than that, so multiple years. And this starter set falls somewhere in between those two categories that we knew from the beginning of the development of the core rule books, like the 2024 Player's Handbook, that there was going to need to be a starter set that kind of reintroduced these rules to folks. And it had been a few years since Dragons of Stormwreck Isle, so it felt like a nice opportunity to give people something new and something for them to experience. And this time maybe with an eye towards some of those board gamers who are curious about D&D, but maybe don't want to go full on into the very text-heavy approach of, you know, a full-fledged Player's Handbook.
Yeah, we really know that that first game of D&D you play, like you were saying, it's so often somebody teaches you how to play. It's hard if you don't have that person and you want to learn how to play or you're curious about the game. Because if you've never played a role-playing game before, it's not that it's difficult to do. It just feels uncomfortable that first time because you're not sure, well, am I doing this right? What am I supposed to do? So bringing in some of those board game components that you might be more familiar with just as setup to help get you going on that first role-playing experience. We just really wanted to do playtesting and experiment with how we can make that very first game you play or that onboarding experience or getting your friend to come play just a little bit more like inviting and comfortable of something you might have experienced before. And I think the team did a really great job, especially with those character sheets of like how to kind of make it easy for that first time.
Oh, I was going to ask you if you had like a favorite component to it. As creative director, I'm sure you've had to see a bunch of them, but it sounds like maybe the character boards might be the winner there.
I love the character boards because, you know, I've gotten to see the team evolve that design as they worked on the product. And then I've also, you know, at Gen Con got to DM games with first-time players and actually see them interact with them, ask questions, set them up. And it's so nice to see kind of the end result of all that work and see people play their first game using those sheets and feel really comfortable, or just getting to sit down, give them a, you know, 1 minute little like intro and then have them playing immediately. There wasn't a lot of setup, like they just got it right away. And it's lovely to see, you know, everything that the goals of that design really kind of come true.
Yeah, those boards are really they're really cool. That, you know, we hadn't done something like that, and there was a lot of kind of iterative design throughout that process where we actually partnered with a company down in Culver City who recruits, you know, people from all kinds of backgrounds. So not just people who know what D&D is, but people who like did not know what D&D. People who are like, I'm a board gamer because I love Trouble and Sorry, which some really avid board gamers these days might be like, well, Trouble and Sorry, like, you know, we have Scythe now, we have all this, but those are all valid board games. And so, you know, getting people from that point to being able to play a D&D session in like 30 minutes or less is a tall order. But when we got to kind of see in real time and iterate on based on what kind of barriers they encountered, what parts confused them, and this set is kind of the result of all of that.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I have a lot of people who watch my interview with Brennan where I was filming the opposite direction. You can see my wall of board games. And we have a lot of board gamers out here, and I have at least a couple friends that I finally convinced into trying D&D because this was it's not like a more board game, but a more board game approachable version for them to sort of get their head around. And it's still, and it makes for a very nice segue into the other product because it makes for a nice jumping off point to something that's slightly closer to the on the table pen and paper experience that you will see in something like Welcome to the Hellfire Club, which in its way is almost sort of like a starter set. It's just sort of with a different onboarding group targeted. But let's talk about Welcome to the Hellfire Club. And while in the Here's the Borderlands starter set, we did break things into 3 different adventure modules here, focusing on 3 different things. We do a sort of similar thing in Welcome to the Hellfire Club. So what was the the thought behind making 4 different adventures, and how do those little 4 adventures fit into the greater Stranger Thing world of Eddie Munson and his Hellfire Club?
Yeah, so the adventures, you keyed in on something really well, which is like what's the difference between these two sets, right? Like Stranger Things is like a D&D Stranger Things box set. The starter set is a starter experience. It's good for teaching people. It's good for first-time players. By its nature, the encounters are a lot more simplistic, right? There's not a whole lot of encounters where there's like, well, there are exceptions. There's not like interconnected plots throughout the adventures. There's not, you can play a session in like 30 minutes for some of them or less. Whereas in Welcome to the Hellfire Club, the adventures are kind of more standard, that 2 to 4 hour kind of session that established D&D players kind of know and get. You have character sheets instead of the class board presentation, which kind of leans into the those 80s inspired roots that we have through there. Like we could have done class boards for this, but that's for the starter set. And Eddie and his players were not using class boards. They were using those goldenrod character sheets, and Kara was really great in driving a lot of that aesthetic throughout the product. It's also the reason why there's a DM screen in this product, which like there's not one in the starter set, because we wanted to encourage people to change roles. So, frequently, whenever they sit down to ask, who's going to be the DM today? And in that way, we wanted to kind of demystify some things. The DM screen is awesome. We love DM screens. I use one every time I play, but it is also a physical barrier between the players and the DM. And so in the starter set, we wanted to bring that barrier down. But in Stranger Things, Eddie's DM screen is iconic, right? He always has one. And because the adventures can each, they're designed to be run by one DM from start to finish, we could put that in there. And we got really cool artists to help with that. And Kara can probably say more about that.
Yeah, we really wanted you to have that experience of what it felt like to play around the table with Eddie. Like there was just such great moments where you're watching them play and wanting to be there with them. We really looked at the product that Eddie would have been playing with in 1986, 1997, what that DM screen looked like, what those campaign modules looked like. But we didn't want to just recreate them exactly as is. Stranger Things does such a great job of recreating the 80s in this, it's faux-stalgic rather than nostalgic. For those of us that were in the 80s, it didn't look exactly like that. So we wanted to kind of do the same thing with this product. We really capture the really cool design elements that were happening around that time, but with a modern twist, being able to play, the current version of the game and not be limited by some of the limitations that we had there. So we had a really fun time, like pulling all of those retro design elements and then updating them in a fun way, and adding in the Stranger Things aesthetic.
How hard was it to adapt that? Because like you were saying, you guys went for and nailed this, like that Stranger Things, that 80s faux aesthetic they have, but like how hard was it to keep that feel in place, that like very advanced D&D feel they had going, and to convert that to the 2024 rule system? Like, was that a challenge at all, or was that just some like a fun part of the process?
Yeah, I'll let Kara speak to the aesthetic from a game design side. They're like kind of like the same thing where you were discussing with like keeping the Borderlands versus today. There are some differences in kind of how the game was played in the 80s versus now. Now there are exceptions, like the UK adventures were very story driven, but there are kind of nonsensical things in the adventures that, like, if you go back in some of the older D&D adventures and you start to ask questions about like what is it, Mordenkainen's magic mirror or whatever, you're not going to get firm answers on everything. And we leaned into some of that wackiness because these are Eddie's adventures too. Like it's a high school dungeon master, so not everything is going to be this like grand, interconnected plot. Sometimes it's just for those moments. Adapting some of the things to 5th edition was deceptively easy. Honestly, like some of the hardest points came with like trying to be authentic while also making it functional for today's play. So like some of the things that we carried over, like the stat block design, you didn't see stat blocks like that. Some of it we just had to make those calls of like, we're going to give 5th edition stat blocks instead of some of those 1st edition stat block, like evil and good weren't even a thing at that point. I think it was mostly law and chaos at that point, if I remember right. And then other things like with the character sheets, we did some reorganization and wanted to lean forward on putting as much information as possible.
From a design standpoint, we really wanted this to be fun and kind of take you to a different place and feel like you were in that world, but not have to sacrifice any playability or readability to do it. So, we're starting with 5th edition layouts, 5th edition stat blocks, but then what elements could we add in from the past? Like, we pulled fonts from the 1st edition. We looked at, for the monster and magic item cards, we looked at 80s collectible wax packs and what design elements could we pull from that time period if you were kind of collecting cards. Just kind of pull in as much as we can. All of the art in the interior of the books is like high contrast black and white because that was what the art looked like in that era. But we went color on the covers using artists like Butcher Billy and Trevor Gerard, who are like Stranger Things, like really cool artists, and just kind of pulling elements from everywhere that we could to give that authentic feel, but still keep it in 5th edition.
Yeah, and I will say when you open the book, each adventure it's a very perfect blend of the new rule set and just that, as someone, like I said, that grew up with a friend who was using like a lot of his dad's like older like advanced D&D stuff, it has that feel. It looks very setting appropriate, and it kind of looks like it jumped off the screen of Stranger Things, but it is very readable. And if people are worried like, oh, is it some kind of mishmash between the two? No, it's the new rule set, but just presented visually in like a very pleasing Stranger Things 80s aesthetic way, as we were talking about earlier. And it's pretty remarkable. But one of the other things you guys added, which is very fun, and I kind of want to get your pick on what your favorite one is you added some new monsters in this edition. So do either of you have like, from demo dogs to whatever, do you have a favorite new monster you got to add for Welcome to Hellfire Club?
I know Kara's, so Kara, why don't you go first?
I mean, my favorite is, of course, the demo dragon. It's Dungeons and Dragons. We had to get a demo dragon. I really love the way that character was designed by the team because it pulls in the kind of flower petaled Stranger Things Demogorgon look of the demo creatures, but based on the anatomy of a red dragon, and then the D&D Demogorgon, which is the kind of 2-headed giant monster. So of course this dragon has 2 heads. So I just love that it pulls from a lot of different influences to make this cool new monster. Justice, what's yours?
I like all of the demo creatures. We did some pretty exciting things. In the first Stranger Things set, we had a Demogorgon creature, and this time we kind of got another chance to reintroduce it. And so we did some things like incorporating a trait that mirrors how when those larger kind of demo creatures show up in the show, they disrupt all of the lighting around them. So when the Demogorgon spawn appears in the adventure, all of the torches and sources of light are going to start to flicker, emulating what people see on the show. So we did some fun things there. My favorite, I like the rats. Their rats are pretty essential to one of the adventures, which is titled Ballad of the Rat King. And just like the ones in the show, they have a propensity to pop, and all kinds of things can happen with that. But there are a number of really cool creatures there. I'd say if there's anything about the creatures that I like the most, it's just the reimaginings of a lot of them through that kind of nostalgia lens. Kate Irwin was one of the ADs on this project, and so it's really cool to see kind of retro inspired NCAGs, but also with kind of modern art standards. And if you look at the Scarecrow, for example, has a pumpkin for a head. We're leaning into kind of that spooky vibe, and it's just cool seeing all of them. Every time the art would come in, it was just a delight to be able to be like, oh wow, this artist did something so cool. I never thought about that, but yeah, that's totally how a beard devil would look. And they just nailed it. So that was always really nice.
All right. And then I guess one last question, and that is, as you kind of just alluded to there, this is your second time kind of delving into the Stranger Things universe. You've done another box set before, and without giving away future plans, is this a setting that you would be interested at least in coming back and doing, whether it's another box set or a source book or just a fun adventure, like coming back to the Stranger Things universe again for more stuff somewhere down the line for D&D?
Yeah, I mean, we really enjoyed working with our friends over at Netflix. Kara and I are both huge Stranger Things fans. We actually got to go down to Atlanta and visit the set. It was really cool. We were stranded at the airport because that's also when that kind of airline wide network shortage happened or outage.
Oh, yeah, CrowdStrike,
we,
whatever it was called.
Yeah, yes, except for Southwest Airlines because they were running off of like 80s monitors or something, appropriate to Stranger Things. But yeah, I mean, I'd be super interested in doing another collaboration with them. Like even with this set, we've really only scratched the surface of the characters and potential that we have there. So yeah,
it's always great to work with everybody that has a common goal and a common love of D&D, and I felt like it was a smooth collaboration, and everybody really enjoyed working on it. So that's always my favorite thing to do.
All right. Amazing. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time. And if you are watching at home, you can, of course, find, in all of the usual places, either the Heroes of the Borderlands starter set or, of course, the new Welcome to Hellfire Club box set. They're on digital. They're D&D Beyond. They're on your local game store shelves. Check them out. They are both well worth your time. And Karen Justice, thank you so much for joining us. We always appreciate hearing from the D&D team. And for viewers, do the liking and subscribing. And we will be back to talk to you next time on the Character Sheet.
Thank you.
Just in time, as my dog got very mad at something.